How has this year
Well,
been? The anniversary, the
you
100th.
know, yeah, it started out with a real disappointment because with COVID, everything was canceled.
Absolutely.
And personally, my talks were, and one thing and another. And then I think the switch happened where people moved into a virtual reality.
Yes.
And I have been just inundated. And the thing that's exciting to me about it, Mimi, is that the inundation is it's everything from Time Magazine, Washington Post, New York Times, CNN did a special on Saturday, Aaron Burnett, and I was in that. What people want is an alternative history. And when I agreed to do the women's suffrage movement anthology for Penguin Classics, it was, they asked, what would you like to see in an anthology? And I said, well, I don't want something that starts when white women arrive here. History is, there's a
Mhm.
long history before then. Haudenosaunee women, indigenous women, have had voice politically on this land for 1,000 years while we're celebrating 100. And I don't want it to be just about the vote because they were raising every issue that we continue to raise today. Gage was from equal pay to reproductive justice and
Absolutely.
violence against women. I mean, you name it, it's there. And I really want the racism of the later movement when Gage drops out. I want that to be called racism, not expediency, as historians are calling it. Well, it's unfortunate, but the women had to do it to get the vote. You do not have to throw a group under the bus to win your freedom. If you do that, you've won the battle, but you've lost the war. And so with smoke coming out of my ears, I hit send and sent this off to Penguin, and they said, I thought like they're going to publish something like that. They do Shakespeare. It's not going to happen. And I was absolutely astounded when they said that's exactly what we want. Will you do it? And when I met with the publisher, a woman of color, a Latina, it was like that's what happens when women of color get in positions of decision making. And what I thought that probably would be during this year a set aside. It's that the typical 1848 to 1920 narrative would be it. It's the vote, it's Anthony and Stanton, end of story. And the pushback against that, everything from the statue in Central Park and all the pushback against that elevating in stone to, non-emotional white women, and then the forcing of an African American woman and that being called marginalization. That's one thing, but I am getting I would say the phone is ringing off the hook, but it's the computer is heating up with
Yes.
people saying, yes, what's the story of the Haudenosaunee influence on the women's rights movement? Talk about the racism of the movement. And it has just absolutely astounded me. And this isn't about me, this is about the historic moment. History isn't what happened, it's who tells the story. And
Yes.
it's what story do you tell? Who is empowered by that story and who is disempowered by that story? And the world is looking for a story of empowerment at this moment.
Oh my God. Well, that brings me to exactly the quote that she said. It's, she talks, this is right from Matilda. In no other country has the conflict between natural and revealed rights been as pronounced as in the United States. And in this country where the conflict first began, she's talking about the American Revolution against monarchy for the voice of the people, we shall see its full and final development. During the ages, no rebellion has been of like importance with that of woman against the tyranny of church and state. None has had its far-reaching effects, we note its beginning. Its progress will overthrow every existing form of these institutions. Its end will be a regenerated world.
Generated world.
So do not fear. We're not going into chaos and corruption. We're opening into a regenerated world because we're accepting, we're hearing the voices of everybody, and we're understanding the connectedness of us all. In her day, she was fighting for half the human race, as she often put it, how the rights denied to half the human race under our Constitution. She was saying it was meant for all. But you've said, no, women aren't. She was citizens. She limited to that at the time. But that reminds me of how our arguments are based on the frame as we understand it, as we can argue within it. This happens in the law all the time. And you win an opening of the mind to the political right becoming more like the natural endowed rights endowed by the Creator, which is our framing in the Constitution. And she, being a woman who wrote Woman, Church, and State, acknowledging the corruption of religion into what she called male idolatry, she has that wonderful quote, "True religion undoes the burdens of the oppressed." She said
and
that
sets
because she
people
was
free.
Yeah, it sets people free. She was so sick of the church and the patriarchy and the male idolatry of the church being used along with the elimination of women as people, as citizens in the Constitution. She railed against them both, and brilliantly. I smiled. I came on a quote.
And
What? Go ahead.
she also, I'm beginning to understand, was a model of intersectionality.
Yes.
Because in her flag presentation speech in 1862, she isn't talking about women. She's saying there will be no permanent peace until there is absolute equality for every group, rich and poor, men and women, native born and immigrant,
That's right.
Black and it's she names it. She has the intersectionality of oppression, and she recognizes that peace is not the absence of war, it's the presence of justice, and it's the presence of equality. And I think that quote combines with the one at the end of her writing life, the end of Woman, Church, and State that you quoted. And I think what she envisions is an end to all oppressions and an end to patriarchy as a result.
And you know what moves me so much at this moment is her vision for a regenerated world, but she believes that the Constitution, as an imperfect document, and the overthrow of monarchy as a beginning of a process, she believes in it. She was a woman who said, this is a very good attempt. We have not admitted the indigenous influence in how we set it up, which the Iroquois Federation of Nations. We have eliminated the perfect justice of men and women that they had in that framing, and we have thrown women out of our constitutional framing. But she said, I will work with this. I will work with this. I think now of our moment as being one where the oligarchs, the patriarchs, have even thrown out any pretend reverence for the Constitution as written. It's as if, well, that's, we don't have to pay attention to that. We're going to make up our own our God has a higher law than what we put in this Constitution. We're not going to follow that now because we have another agenda that has nothing to do with equality, and we're going to follow that. So screw the Constitution. I love, and I'm very moved by Matilda's belief that men and women and all peoples together as the voice of the people with the ballot box could actually establish righteous laws and come closer to liberty and independence.
Mhm. And I think if we look at, there are different times in your life and different issues and different ways in which she understood. And when we look at the suffrage period from 1869 to 1890, I think absolutely she sees the Constitution as the framework with which to build democracy. And I think after 1890, when the movement becomes deliberately racist, is taken over by Christian conservatives, at that point, I think she begins to see a bigger vision. And that's the transformed world that she sees. And it's beyond politics, it's beyond religion. It's a total transformation. When she talks about the matriarchate as the vision, this where females are held in religious spiritual esteem because they are the creators of life, and it's an egalitarian society. It's it's the end of patriarchy. And
the lack of responsibility of men. She often calls out men for their lack of responsibility based on this Bible that, the woman will bear in pain and the man will work by the sweat of his brow. She does point out that women have a lot more sweat on their brows doing the work that men are saying is relegated to their sphere than the men have on their brows. She talked rather humorously about the white collars. She said, I noticed there's not a lot of sweat and dirt on the Reverend's white collar. She notes things like that, simply to poke holes in the arguments that are being made to oppress women, and certainly to support slavery. And you keep citing Frances Willard and what happened to the women's movement at the turn of the century. Vicious anti-immigration. They didn't want any of these new people at all in the United States. And that was racist as well, because of course it was thought that the inferior races were coming in and replacing us. And Matilda didn't want anything to do with that either. She was not silent about it.
She's out of the movement by then. And that's when the movement, the National American Women's Suffrage Association, begins to make the argument, give women the vote because it's a way to maintain white native-born supremacy. There are more white women than there are African Americans, both men and women. There are more white women than there are native-born women, than there are immigrant men and women. So come on, guys, give us the vote. We will work with you to maintain white native-born supremacy. Elizabeth Cady Stanton's final speech, and the last speech she gives in her life at a convention, is a speech talking about the need for educated suffrage, which was a dog whistle for African Americans when they were enslaved. Of course, couldn't read and write. It was illegal. And immigrant men coming in, they hadn't all learned to vote or learn to read and write. Instead to educate.
She called out, I found this thing too. She said, much is said of the wild, mad desire of the age for money. It was 1868. Money is but another name for power. It is but another name for bread. It is but another name for freedom. And those who possess it not are the slaves of those who do. That's what she was decrying. Money is a name for being able to eat, having the freedom to sustain yourself and nurture yourself. That's what she's saying. It's another name for freedom. That's what you're free if you have the money. But it's oppressing. Those with it oppress and make slaves of those without it. That was just something she said in passing. And there was another thing that really leaped out at me, because I chew on that code of noblesse oblige that's so often, to those from whom, to those whom much is given. Anyway, all of the prepositions in that phrase make it inscrutable to the way it's quoted. But here is Matilda quoting it correctly and giving her turn on it. From those women to whom much has been given, much is expected. But that's not the last of what she says, because she understands, well, that's just the lucky ones, and they can rule over us. They'll do stuff for us. She goes on, from those women to whom little has been given, a little is expected. From all, we look for something. I love that she recognized economic inequality, but she didn't use it as the way the right wing so often does, is, well, I deserved it. God gave it to me and I have it, and I'll give some to you, but mostly I'll make laws and run things for myself. And Matilda was saying right there, even to women who were like, well, Matilda, I can't, my husband doesn't own a store like yours does. I don't have any extra money. I can't get to the convention. I can't do this. I can't do that. And she's like, it's okay. But everybody needs to do something for this liberation. The moment is at hand. And I also think that speaks to us, don't you?
Yeah, and the moment she's writing that is when the movement absolutely requires money. And she's appealing to the rich women, saying, look, you need to step up to bat. But, everybody is stepping up to bat to some degree. And she is critical of the wealth in a whole lot of different ways.
Yes.
The way in which wealth is used as power, the inequality of it. And
the inequality. Do you remember that? Well, of course, her husband's store burned down at one point, and there was also an effigy hung on the lamppost outside her house. And I do think her politics made her a somewhat unpopular character for some of her neighbors, but they didn't criticize her to her face.
Mm-hmm. And, she had, her letters are just filled with, here comes so-and-so today, and here comes somebody else today. And she is both reviled and she is honored and loved.
Exactly.
Both are going on in her community. Yeah.
And her father was a doctor. Let us talk about healthcare and how important she understood a healthy body to be. She was often talking about what we ate, and the indigenous, remember, she was so entranced by, they grew their own food and they made something called succotash. What was it? She wanted the recipe and she published it, right, in the local paper. Her father, being a doctor, she was not squeamish. She attended at labor and births in the community sometimes. I know that there are instances, I think, in her letters that you cite where I think she helped her daughter Helen, certainly, with the delivery of her child. Do you remember any of that? I
don't remember that. I know that Julia came home to have one of her children when she was living in North Dakota.
That may have been.
And yeah, I'm not sure whether they were I think that Julia birthed at the Gage home.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was who was in attendance at that.
Well, it's just unusual to me at the time for a woman. I haven't read as much Susan B. Anthony or Elizabeth Cady Stanton as I have of Matilda, but along with her intersectionality, she had such a healthy view of the equality and what we share as human beings. So to her, to make any divisions or separation in terms of what we needed, justice, health, she decried the treatment of the poor people in her area. And she talked about the kids that had nothing to eat and the young women who had nothing, no way to earn a living. I mean, I remember these outbursts of personal compassion as well as political demands for equality. She threaded it all together and lived an extraordinary life. And she got the first voting in New York State, right, for the Fayetteville School Board.
She was one of the women instrumental in the New York State Women's Suffrage Association getting a school suffrage bill passed. And she brings the women of Fayetteville together to see if they can work out with the progressive men, I assume, a ticket together. And the men won't deal with them. So the women come up with an all-woman ticket and they win.
The night before.
It makes sure that women get to the ballot box. She makes sure that they get to vote. And then in 1893, she pushes the envelope and she tries to vote. The right that they're given is to vote in school board elections locally.
Yes.
But what she does is to vote for school superintendent, which is a state office.
Right.
And so she's arrested and goes to court and she loses her case, but she pushes the envelope on that one. And she actually, the story about voting is Susan B. Anthony is the only one who did it and was arrested. Well, women started the civil disobedience campaign of voting in 1868. That's like 4 years before Anthony votes. Yeah. Gage tries to vote a year before Anthony votes in 1871 and is denied. Anthony just becomes the test case for the idea that Gage argues that, it's the lawbreaker in this case is not Susan B. Anthony. The lawbreaker is not the women who are trying to vote and voting. The lawbreaker is the federal government that is failing to protect them in their inherent right to the ballot.
Yeah.
And so she turns the tables and she said, we're not asking for a new right. We're asking for the restitution of a right that our foremothers had because women voted in the colonies and she knew it. And she makes the argument that we have the right to vote as citizens in a republic. And it is the federal government that needs to be held accountable for allowing the states to deny us the right
precisely
to vote.
To protect the citizens' right from a state that would deny it. In that instance, Fayetteville school board election, they had asked the liberal men, the progressive men of the village, to have a woman on their slate. And the men met late into the night. I just went over this. And in the morning, only in the morning of voting day, did you see who's on the card for that slate? And there was no woman. They had proposed one candidate. They left that woman off. So Matilda, hastily having seen this ticket, maybe before the polls opened, it's a small town, I don't know, she gathers the women together and says, we got to have a slate, and they wrote it in. They had a write-in slate of candidates, and 3 of them were elected, including Matilda's daughter, who I believe was pressured into stepping up so the women would have a full slate. And they did go out with the women with carriages, went out all day and got women to the polls to vote. And Matilda said, I will be sitting there as an inspector to make sure none of their tricks are pulled. And you know what that would be. Well, you need to show ID, whatever they are today. Oh, you're not on the rolls. I don't think you're registered. Any of that. And she, who knew the law, would sit there and go, no, this person is registered here, whatever. But that, as an election integrity activist, I was so pleased And it went with her speech. You know, we must not expect this revolution to be easy, but in the meantime, let us take control of the outposts. And so it is with our intersectional march to equality today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm buoyed by the way that more people, you as a historian, Sally, we have to thank, because you and others like you have taught us very patiently to look at alternative explanations of America, including our exceptionalism. And we are now looking at the injustice and the blood and the ongoing injustice. This has deep roots. And those that we have idolized and honored, we're part of the injustice. And it, as grown-ups, grown-up America, really, I think we're passing out of our adolescence now as a country. We have to be able to accept our flaws and say, well, it's not going to kill us. It's not going to undo us. We have aspirations. They were put down in words, in documents. We need to open this thing up to everybody now and accept this story and let the people go forward, not just one people, all the people that are here. And that's the regenerated world.
Yeah.
Hope we make it. Thank you for your historian's lessons, Sally. You have done so much. First of all, you edited this. I'll never forget. You said, well, I had to make things into paragraphs and put more periods and semicolons than she had put so that I could understand the sentence. And it's brilliant. And your history of women's suffrage, that's out now. Everyone is.
I have another new book, just came out last week. I should show you.
Is that the one you're having an event for, right? No, that's separate?
We're having an event for a new film that's just come out. We're having a fundraiser for the Gage Foundation with a showing of a film made by a Mohawk filmmaker. And it's looking at the Haudenosaunee influence on women's rights from the right perspective, which is the perspective of a Haudenosaunee woman. And it sort of follows, in some ways, the friendship that I have with the Bear Clan, the Mohawk Bear Clan mother, Apadakusasne. And it's sort of, our friendship frames the story from the 19th century.
Wait, is it Kachi was in it? Because I saw the name. We were together at Akwesasne. In 2007.
You met Louise. Sure. You met Louise.
I met
Hearn, the grandmother. And the filmmaker is Gachijuni Fox. And you may have met her as well, but I know you met Louise.
I met Louise.
And
the elders.
Yes. And we're doing this as a fundraiser for the Gage Foundation. It's the 26th, but actually you can watch the film anytime until the 29th, along with the Q&A that will follow the showing of the film tomorrow night, the 26th.
Fantastic.
And it's the Q&A is with the filmmaker and Louise and I, and we'll just be talking about
So what is the book? We want equal rights.
Equal rights.
Who's there in the middle? Who's the woman standing in the middle? There's one
that is that is Caroline Mount Pleasant Parker, and that's a photograph from the 1850s. She's a Seneca woman.
Wow. And
it is how suffragists were influenced by Haudenosaunee women.
Oh, Sally, I'm so glad. You've talked about that for years to me.
It's for young people. and it's a picture
I'm
book.
young in
And
history learning. I never was much of a history student, so I'll love that.
well, the reason we did it was because the um, folks that had published Sisters in Spirit, the
Yeah.
Haudenosaunee influence on women's rights, they were getting all kinds of requests for a book for younger women. And so this is a young adult or a young reader's book.
Wow.
So we're getting the word out to younger folks.
Yeah, well, that's really important. And the younger folks are getting the word out to us too, from their perspective.
Yes,
And you're
absolutely.
feeding, but that's what it is to be a historian. And I never understood it or appreciated it. You and I used to laugh about this, not liking history very much when we were girls, because what was it? It was a war
Yes.
and then a ruler, and then a war and then another ruler, and then a group of men and another ruler and another war. And it was like, what is the point? Who's living? Who's having children? Who's drawing pictures? Who's making something? Who's doing anything other than having a war and making a ruler that just gets overthrown by another war? And your contribution has given me the answers to that. There has been a rich human development, and it has worked, of course, in ourselves, psychologically and physiologically, but it has worked through history too, which is not something I understood. And civilizations arise that allow it to flower, and then war, ruler, you know, there are these constrictions, and then there is an opening up again, and then there's another constriction. But I'm reminded of labor pains. Even as I do this, there is always something coming forward. And that is, you know, Matilda even refers to it. She says it's the spirit of women. The thing that is not material must be united with the material things over which, she said, men have sought power and they have suppressed women. It was, you know, men to the spirit and then woman to man. The woman was not allowed any participation in this spirit thing because that was power and rule, and women had their sphere in the home. And she was saying, no, we are equal. We're all equal, and we all have that access. And as you said, the Haudenosaunee, which was, in my understanding, the Seneca Indians were the Haudenosaunee people. You have taught me that. And they comprised.
They're one of the 6 nations. The Haudenosaunee are the 6 nations of the Confederacy: the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and then the Tuscarora joined in 1713.
Yeah.
So
all together, they're the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous of that part.
And they're nations. They're all sovereign nations that have joined together in a peace confederacy 1,000 years ago on the shores of Onondaga Lake, 20 minutes away from where I am.
Those Finger Lakes make me peaceful too, but they're so beautiful. And that part of the world is so beautiful. It's really the land I was born in, but I didn't know its history. So thank you for that, Sally. Well, happy 2020, dare I say that? It's being roundly derided this year as just been horrible. But we're moving forward.
Yes, we are. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
Always.
Thank you for your time. I love you, Sal.
And love you. Take care, my friend.
Okay, I will.